Clare Whitmore stood at the center of a construction site that had gone completely still. No machines running, no workers moving, just the sound of wind pushing through half-finished walls and the weight of a $4.6 million deadline bleeding out by the hour. She looked down at her phone. The message she had sent to Marcus Jennings sat there, unread. 3 days ago, she had looked him straight in the eye and told him he was not good enough. Now, she would have said anything at all just to get him back. 5 days earlier, Marcus Jennings stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his small rental house on the east side of Portland, pressing a warm iron across the collar of a white dress shirt. It was the only one he owned that did not have a stain or a fraying cuff. He had bought it 3 years ago for his wife's funeral and had not worn it since. He pulled it on, buttoned it slowly, and tucked it into his cleanest pair of dark slacks. In the kitchen, his 6-year-old daughter Sophie sat at the table with a box of crayons spread around her like a tiny empire. She was drawing a picture, a big yellow sun, a small house with a red door, and 2 stick figures standing side by side, one tall, one short. "What are you drawing, Soph?" Marcus asked, pouring her a glass of orange juice. "It's you going to your new job," she said without looking up, carefully filling in the sun with long, looping strokes. "And that's me waiting for you to come home." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Tell you what. If today goes well, we'll get ice cream tonight. Deal?" Sophie grinned, and that grin carried him all the way out the door. Whitmore Industrial Solutions occupied a sleek glass building downtown, the kind of place where the lobby alone cost more than Marcus made in a year. He stood just inside the revolving doors, holding a manila folder with his resume and certifications, feeling the way a man feels when he knows he does not quite belong but has decided to walk in anyway. A voice broke through the silence. "Marcus Jennings?" A heavy-set man in his late 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes came toward him with an outstretched hand. "Ray Callahan, senior site foreman, 26 years with the company. Son, I've looked at your file. You're the best I've seen in 20 years. Just be yourself in there." The interview room was glass-walled and cold. Clare Whitmore sat on one side of the table in a fitted charcoal blazer, her posture straight, her expression carefully neutral. Beside her was Derek Lowe, the company's chief operating officer, mid-40s, thinning hair, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Marcus sat across from them and placed his folder on the table. Clare opened his file without greeting him. She did not ask how his drive was. She did not offer coffee or small talk. She scanned the pages quickly, her eyes pausing at the education section the way a border agent pauses at a missing stamp. 15 years of field experience, she said, reading aloud as if to confirm what she was seeing. Advanced Journeyman Electrical Certification, Commercial and Industrial Clearance. But no college degree. It was not a question. It was a line drawn in the sand, and Marcus could feel it under his feet before she even looked up. Marcus nodded. "I started working right out of high school. Learned everything on the job. I can walk you through any system in your current portfolio and tell you what's wrong with it before your engineers finish their coffee." He said it without arrogance. The way a man states a fact he has earned the right to say. Derek leaned forward. "There's a gap in your employment history. 8 months, about 3 years ago. Can you explain that?" The room seemed to shrink. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he spoke evenly. "My wife passed away. I took time off to take care of my daughter." He did not elaborate. He did not think he needed to. Clare closed the folder. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Jennings. We'll be in touch." The meeting had lasted less than 12 minutes. Marcus stood, shook their hands, and walked toward the elevator. But as he passed Clare's office, the door was slightly ajar, and he heard her voice clear and unhesitant speaking to Derek on the other side. "He's a liability. No degree, single parent, unpredictable schedule. We can't afford that kind of risk on a project this size." Marcus did not stop. He did not knock on the door and defend himself. He did not go back and tell her about the time he rewired an entire hospital wing during a power outage, or the time he spent 47 straight hours diagnosing a fault in a steel mill's arc furnace system because walking away meant 300 people losing power in January. He just kept walking, through the gleaming lobby, past the security desk, past the receptionist who did not look up, and out into the gray Portland afternoon. He sat in his truck for a long time with the engine off and the windows up. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from anger, but from the image that kept flashing behind his eyes. Sophie's drawing. The big sun, the two stick figures, the house with the red door. He had promised her ice cream. He drove to a grocery store and bought a half-gallon of strawberry because a promise to his daughter was the one thing no interview could take away from him. Clare Whitmore returned to her office that afternoon and walked straight into a conference call she had been dreading all week. The board of directors, 4 men, all over 60, all of whom had known her father, filled the screen with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly impatient. The subject was the Portland River Crossing Project, a mixed-use development that was supposed to be the crown jewel of her first year as CEO. The deadline was 11 days away. The project was already behind schedule, and everyone in that call knew it. "Your father would have had this locked down by now," said Harold Meeks, the longest-serving board member, his tone landing somewhere between observation and accusation. Clare clenched her jaw and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that responding to comparisons with her father only invited more of them. After the call, she sat alone in her corner office on the 14th floor. The city spread out below her bridges, cranes, traffic, and none of it felt like hers. She had taken over Whitmore Industrial after her father, George Whitmore, died of a heart attack 2 years ago. He had built the company from a 2-man operation into one of the Pacific Northwest's most respected infrastructure firms. Clare had spent her entire adult life trying to earn a place at his table, and now that she finally sat at it, the chairs around her were filled with men who looked at her and saw a placeholder. She drove home to a penthouse apartment that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. White walls, clean lines, no photographs, no clutter, no warmth. The kitchen had appliances she had never used. The dining table seated 6, but had never held more than 1 plate. She poured a glass of wine she would not finish and sat on the couch with her laptop open, reviewing spreadsheets until the numbers blurred into shapes that meant nothing. Her mother lived in Sarasota, Florida. They spoke once a month, sometimes less, and the conversations always ended the same way, with Clare saying she was fine, and her mother choosing to believe it. Clare could not remember the last time she had told someone something that mattered. She could not remember the last time someone had asked. Across town, Marcus pulled into the driveway of his rented bungalow and barely had the engine off before Sophie came running out the front door, arms wide. "Did you get the job?" she asked, her face full of a hope that made his chest ache. "Not yet, kiddo," he said, scooping her up. Still waiting to hear back. He carried her inside, set her on the counter, and started boiling water for pasta. That evening, he walked next door to fix a faulty light switch for Mrs. Delgado, the 72-year-old widow who had been his neighbor since he moved in. She asked him about the interview. He smiled and said, "Not the right fit." She studied him for a moment, then handed him a foil-wrapped plate of tamales without another word. After Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. Rent was due in 10 days. The truck needed new brake pads. Sophie's glasses prescription had changed, and the new lenses were not cheap. He had enough money to last 3 weeks, maybe 4, if he skipped a few meals. He closed his eyes and pressed his palms flat against the table, steadying himself the way he always did by making the next decision, not the one after that. That same night, Clare opened her inbox and found a message from Ray Callahan. It was short, just 2 sentences. "You passed on the best electrician I've ever worked with. I hope you know what you're doing." She read it twice, then deleted it. But long after the screen went dark, the words stayed sitting in a place she could not quite name and could not quite ignore. 2 days later, everything fell apart. The electrical system inside Building C of the Portland River Crossing Complex, the largest and most critical structure in the development, suffered a cascading failure during a routine load test. Circuit breakers tripped in sequence. Panels overheated. An entire section of conduit, buried inside newly poured concrete walls, turned out to have been routed through a design flaw that no one on the engineering team had caught. The building went dark. Work stopped. 1,200 linear feet of wiring would need to be traced, diagnosed, and either repaired or replaced, all inside walls that were already sealed. It got worse. During the initial troubleshooting, one of the company's 2 senior electricians touched a live junction that should have been de-energized but was not. The shock threw him backward off a ladder. He was conscious but shaken, with burns on his right hand, and was taken to Providence Portland Medical Center by ambulance. The second electrician, seeing the scope of the failure, told the site supervisor he was not qualified to handle it alone. Work on Building C came to a complete halt. Derek Lowe saw an opportunity. He walked into Claire's office that afternoon with a proposal already typed and bound a subcontract with an outside firm called Redline Electrical, based in Beaverton. The bid was $280,000. The timeline was 2 weeks. Claire stared at the numbers. 2 weeks would blow the deadline. The city would invoke the penalty clause. The board would have the excuse they had been waiting for. "This is the only option," Derek said, sliding the proposal across her desk. "No one in-house can handle this. We need to move now." Claire did not respond immediately. Something about the speed of his preparation, the neatness of the folder, the ready signature lines made her uneasy, though she could not yet say why. That evening, Ray Callahan appeared at her office door. He had not made an appointment. He stood in the doorway with his hard hat under his arm and sawdust on his boots, looking like a man who had run out of patience for protocol. "I know one person who can fix this," he said. "The man you turned away." Claire leaned back in her chair. "Jennings." Ray nodded. "I watched him rewire the main distribution system at a steel plant in Seattle 4 years ago. The whole thing had been botched by a licensed engineering crew. Marcus went in alone and fixed it in 3 days. 3 days, Claire. And he did it cleaner than the original design." Claire folded her arms. "Why didn't you say that in the interview?" Ray looked at her without flinching. "I did. You weren't listening." The silence that followed sat between them like a third person in the room. Ray left without another word. Claire stayed at her desk for a long time, turning the situation over in her mind. She thought about the board. She thought about the deadline. She thought about the look on Marcus Jennings's face when she had ended the interview, early, not angry, not hurt, just still. The kind of still that comes from a man who has been underestimated so many times, he no longer wastes energy being surprised by it. She picked up her phone. She pulled up his number from the applicant database. Then she sat in her car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, staring at the screen, before she pressed call. It rang 4 times. 5. She almost hung up. Then his voice came through, quiet, steady, guarded. "Hello?" Clare Whitmore, for the first time in her professional life, did not have a script. She was not making a decision from a position of strength. She was asking, and she knew it. Marcus was sitting on a bench at Laurelhurst Park, watching Sophie pump her legs on the swings, when his phone buzzed. He did not recognize the number, but something about the timing the late afternoon call, the 503 area code, made him answer. Claire's voice came through, measured and controlled, but underneath the composure, he could hear something he had not heard during the interview. Need. She explained the situation in precise terms. The electrical failure, the injured worker, the deadline, the fact that no one on her team could solve it. She did not exaggerate, and she did not soften. When she finished, there was a pause long enough to hear Sophie laughing in the background. "You told me I was a liability," Marcus said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact, spoken the same way he might read a voltage meter flat, accurate, without embellishment. Claire did not deflect. She did not offer an excuse or reframe what she had said. "I was wrong about that," she said. The words came out steady, but Marcus could hear the effort behind them. This was not a woman who said those words often. He believed her not because it was a perfect apology, but because it was an honest one. He watched Sophie jump off the swing and land on both feet, arms raised in triumph, and he made his decision. "I'll do it," he said, "but I have 3 conditions." Claire waited. "First, I leave the site by 6 every evening. No exceptions. My daughter needs me home." There was a beat of silence. Then Claire said, "Fine. Second, you pay me what the work is worth. Not emergency freelancer rates. Not a discount because I don't have a diploma on my wall. Fair compensation for 15 years of experience." Another pause. "Agreed. Third, I report to Ray Callahan, not to your COO." This time, the pause was longer. "May I ask why?" Marcus chose his next words carefully. "Because Ray looked at my work and saw what I could do. Your COO looked at my resume and saw what I didn't have. I'd rather work for a man who trusts what he's seen," Claire said. "Done." When Marcus hung up, Sophie ran over to him, breathless and red-cheeked. "Who was that, Daddy?" "Someone who needs help fixing something big," he said, lifting her onto his shoulders. "Like a building?" "Yeah, baby, like a building." Sophie considered this carefully. "You're the best at fixing things," she declared, with the unshakable authority of someone who has never once doubted her father. Back in her office, Claire set the phone down and sat very still. Something had shifted, not in the project, not in the timeline, but in her. Marcus Jennings had just set boundaries with the CEO of a company that had rejected him, and he had done it without a single trace of resentment. No power play, no score to settle, just clarity. She realized, with a strange and unfamiliar feeling, that it was the first time someone had placed conditions on her that she did not experience as a challenge. She experienced them as respect, the kind that is earned by giving it first. That evening, Derek Lowe received a call from Claire, informing him that the Red Line subcontract was on hold. His face went tight. What Claire did not yet know but would eventually discover was that Red Line Electrical was co-owned by a college friend of Derek's, and the $280,000 bid included a $60,000 markup that would have found its way, through carefully layered invoices, back to Derek's pocket. Marcus coming back meant that payday was gone. Marcus arrived at the Portland River crossing site at 6:30 the next morning, a full hour before the rest of the crew. He parked his truck between 2 company vans and walked through the gate, carrying a canvas tool bag that had seen more job sites than most of the engineers on payroll. The sky was overcast, the air cool and damp the way only Portland mornings can be, and the half-finished complex rose around him like a skeleton waiting for muscle. Ray met him at the entrance to Building C with a hard hat and a laminated badge. "Glad you're here, son," was all he said. Marcus put on the hat, clipped the badge to his belt, and stepped inside. By 7:30, when the rest of the crew trickled in, Marcus had already opened 3 panels and was tracing lines with a multimeter, mapping the circuit paths by hand in a small notebook. The other workers watched him the way people watch a stranger who has been handed the keys to their house. Some of them had been with the company for years. A few had tried to diagnose the failure themselves and come up empty. Now here was a man with no badge on his wall and no history with the firm, moving through their site with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. By 11 o'clock, Marcus had found it the root cause of the cascading failure. A junction box on the 4th floor had been wired in a reverse-phase configuration, a mistake buried inside the original engineering drawings that had been signed off by 2 licensed professionals and reviewed by a 3rd. It had created a feedback loop that built pressure across the system like water behind a cracked dam. Every electrician who had looked at the panels on the lower floors had been chasing symptoms, pulling apart connections that were working exactly as designed. The problem was never downstream. It was at the top, hidden in plain sight, in a box that someone had labeled verified and never opened again. Marcus had gone straight to the source because experience had taught him that the most dangerous mistakes are the ones no one thinks to check. Ray stood beside him as he explained the problem, sketching a diagram on the back of a work order. "That's why I vouched for you," Ray said, shaking his head. 15 years of school couldn't teach a man to see what you just saw in 4 hours. Marcus shrugged. "I've just been wrong enough times to know where to look." That afternoon, Clare Whitmore did something she had not done since becoming CEO. She left her office, drove to the construction site, and walked through the mud in shoes that were not made for mud. She told herself she was there to assess progress, and maybe she was. But when she reached Building C and saw Marcus on a ladder, methodically reconnecting conduit while explaining every step to the apprentice below him, she stopped walking and just watched. He worked with his hands the way some people speak fluently, precisely, and with an ease that made complicated things look simple. He never raised his voice. When the apprentice made a mistake, Marcus simply reached over, adjusted the connection, and said, "Like this. You'll get it." Clare had spent her career in rooms where authority was performed. Here was a man who carried it without performance. At 5:45, Marcus stopped. He set down his tools, washed his hands at the utility sink, and reached for his jacket. Derek appeared from behind a stack of drywall, his arms crossed. "We're behind. You can't leave now." Marcus looked at his watch. "My daughter's waiting," he said, and walked past Derek without slowing down. Clare saw all of it from 20 yards away. She said nothing, but something in her expression changed, a softening she did not intend and could not take back. That night, driving home, she took a route she did not usually take and ended up stopped at a red light across from Irving Park. Through the windshield, she watched a father pushing his daughter on a swing set under the glow of a street lamp. The girl was laughing. The father was laughing too. Clare sat through 2 green lights without moving. For the first time in years, the loneliness she felt had nothing to do with being alone. It had to do with realizing that nothing in her life, not the title, not the office, not the company her father had built, had ever once made her feel the way that man on the swing set looked. On the 3rd morning, Marcus's babysitter called at 6:15 to say she had a flat tire and would be 30 minutes late. Marcus looked at the clock, looked at Sophie, still in pajamas, eating a toaster waffle, and made the only decision he could. He packed her crayons, a coloring book, and a juice box into her backpack and drove her to the site. Ray set Sophie up in the job trailer with a folding table and a stack of paper. She seemed perfectly content, humming to herself and drawing with the focused intensity that only a 6-year-old can sustain. Marcus checked on her twice before 8 o'clock, and both times she waved him off with the impatience of a tiny professional who did not appreciate being interrupted. Mid-morning, Clare came to the trailer to retrieve a set of permits from the filing cabinet. She pushed open the door and found Sophie sitting cross-legged on a metal chair, bent over a drawing. Clare stopped. She had not expected anyone else to be there. "Hi," Sophie said, looking up with no trace of shyness. "I'm drawing my dad." She held up the picture, a tall figure in a yellow hard hat standing next to a large building, with a bright orange sun overhead and the words, "My dad fix everything," written in wobbly letters along the bottom. Clare crouched beside her. She did not know why. It was not the sort of thing she did. "That's really good," she said, and meant it. "What are you going to draw next?" Sophie thought about it. "My mom," she said. "She's in heaven. I'm drawing her watching my dad work. She always used to watch him fix stuff at home, so I think she still watches." The words came out easily, the way children speak about enormous things without armor, without strategy, without knowing that what they have said has just cracked something open in the person sitting next to them. Clare's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. She had sat across from investors, lawyers, board members, and city officials, and she had always known what to say. But sitting on a metal folding chair next to a 6-year-old girl who was drawing her dead mother in the sky, Clare Whitmore had no words at all. Sophie tilted her head. "Do you have a dad?" she asked, the way children ask things without preamble, without warning, without knowing they have just walked through a door that the other person has kept locked for years. Clare swallowed hard. "I did," she said quietly. "He's watching me, too." Sophie nodded, satisfied, as though this were the most natural thing in the world, two people sharing the sky with the people they had lost. They sat together in silence, side by side, a 6-year-old and a CEO, looking out the trailer window at the gray morning light filtering through the scaffolding. The trailer door opened, and Marcus stepped in. He saw them there, his daughter and the woman who had called him a liability sitting next to each other, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He stopped in the doorway. Clare looked up at him, and for the first time since they had met, there was nothing professional between them. No interview table, no hierarchy, no judgment. Just a woman who had been sitting with his daughter and, for a few unguarded minutes, had allowed herself to be someone other than a CEO. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then quietly said, "Come on, Soph. Babysitter's here." Sophie hopped off the chair, grabbed her backpack, and waved at Clare. "Bye. I hope your dad is proud of you." Clare smiled, a real one, small and unsteady, and said, "Me too." That evening, in her apartment, Clare knelt beside her bed and pulled out a box she had not opened since her father's funeral. Inside was a folded linen handkerchief that still faintly smelled like his aftershave, and beneath it, a photograph. The two of them standing together at a construction site, her in rubber boots 3 sizes too big, him laughing. She held the photograph against her chest and cried for the first time in 2 years. Not because she was sad, because a 6-year-old girl with a box of crayons had reminded her what it felt like to miss someone without pretending she did not. Derek Lowe had been watching. He had watched Clare drive to the site for the first time. He had watched Marcus leave at 5:45 without consequence. He had watched the dynamic between them shift from employer and contractor to something less defined and, to Derek, far more dangerous. And now, he made his move. On the evening of Marcus's 4th day, Derek composed an email from an anonymous address and sent it to every member of the board. The subject line read, "Urgent compliance concern Portland River Crossing." Attached was Marcus Jennings' resume, with 2 items circled in red, the absence of a college degree and the 8-month employment gap. Beneath it, Derek had included a summary alleging that Clare had bypassed standard hiring protocols, brought in an unvetted contractor for a safety-critical role, and exposed the company to legal and financial liability. He did not sign it, but he did not need to. The damage was in the document. The next morning, Clare was summoned to an emergency board meeting. She walked into the conference room and found all 4 members already seated, their faces set in the kind of seriousness that announces itself before anyone speaks. Harold Meeks, the chairman, pushed a printout of the email across the table. "Explain this," he said. Clare scanned the document. Her stomach dropped, but her face did not change. She had learned that trick from her father: never let them see the hit land. She took a breath and began. Marcus Jennings holds an advanced journeyman electrical certification with commercial and industrial endorsements. He has 15 years of verified field experience across 3 states, including high-voltage industrial systems, municipal infrastructure, and emergency restoration. He is the most qualified person available to handle this specific type of failure, regardless of whether he holds a college diploma. Meeks was unmoved. "You hired him outside of procedure, Clare. No background check through HR, no formal board notification, no competitive bid process for a contract of this size. You're asking us to risk a $4 million project on a man without formal qualifications, and you did it without telling us." She had no answer for that, because it was true. She had moved fast and skipped the steps, and now those skipped steps were the weapon being used against her. Derek, seated at the far end of the table in a posture of practiced concern, spoke next. I recommend we terminate Mr. Jennings' contract immediately and bring in Redline Electrical. I've already prepared the paperwork." He slid a folder toward the center of the table, and Claire felt the trap close around her. This was not about Marcus. This was about her. Derek wanted the board to see her as reckless, emotional, unfit. If they removed Marcus and brought in his friend's company, Derek would control the project's biggest expense and, with it, the narrative. Claire asked for 24 hours. The board gave her 12. She called Marcus into her office that evening and told him everything: the email, the board, the threat. She did not sugarcoat it. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. "I'll finish what I started," he said. "The politics are your fight, not mine. But I won't let my work be torn apart because someone's playing games." Then he reached into his back pocket and placed a folded set of papers on her desk. It was a handwritten technical report, every fault he had identified, every repair he had made, every remaining task with estimated completion times. The handwriting was neat, the diagrams precise, the logic cleaner and more detailed than any document the engineering department had ever produced. Claire picked it up and read through it slowly. When she looked up, there was something in her eyes that Marcus had not seen before. Not gratitude, exactly, but recognition. She asked, "You don't owe me anything." Marcus stood. "I didn't write it for you," he said. "I wrote it so my daughter knows her father finishes what he starts. Every time, no matter who's watching." He left the office without waiting for a response. Claire sat with the report in her hands, reading it again, and felt something shift beneath her that had nothing to do with the company, and everything to do with the kind of person she wanted to be when no one was keeping score. Claire walked into the boardroom the next morning carrying two things: Marcus's handwritten report and a manila folder she had spent the previous night assembling. She had not slept. Her eyes were clear, but the skin beneath them told a different story. She set both documents on the table and remained standing. "Before you make a decision about Marcus Jennings," she said, "I want to show you what he's done." She opened his report and walked the board through it, the root cause of the failure, the reverse phase junction on the 4th floor, the systematic repairs already completed, the timeline for the remaining work. She showed them the project schedule. Since Marcus had arrived, progress on Building C had not only resumed, but accelerated. In 5 days, he had completed work that the previous team had estimated would take 3 weeks. Harold Meeks studied the numbers. "And the compliance issue?" Claire met his gaze. "I made a judgment call. I stand by it. Mr. Jennings' qualifications speak for themselves, not on paper, but in the work he's done on your site, under your deadline, while the credentialed team we already had could not solve the problem." The room was quiet. Then she picked up the second folder. "Now," she said, "let's talk about the Redline proposal." She opened the folder and placed a series of documents on the table: public filings, incorporation records, a comparison of Redline's bid against 3 independent market estimates. Redline Electrical is co-owned by Kevin Pace, who has been a personal friend of Derek Lowe since college. Their bid of $280,000 is approximately 40% above the market rate for comparable work. The contract was prepared before the board was notified, and it was never put through competitive bidding. She turned to Derek. "You didn't want to protect this company. You wanted to profit from its failure." Derek's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to respond, but the numbers were already on the table, and numbers do not negotiate. Harold Meeks removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The other board members exchanged glances. The silence in the room had the specific weight of men realizing they had been played. Claire spoke one more time. "My father built this company by trusting people who showed up and did the work, not people who showed up with the right paperwork and the right connections. He hired Ray Callahan out of a truck stop in Medford because he saw the man could build. He promoted a bookkeeper to project manager because she understood logistics better than anyone with an MBA. That was the Whitmore way. Marcus Jennings is that kind of person. He has a daughter waiting for him at home every night, and he still came back to a company that rejected him, not for the money, not for the title, but because the work needed to be done, and he was the one who could do it. If this board wants to fire him, then you fire me first, because I will not run a company that punishes competence to protect corruption. The vote was swift. Derek Lowe was terminated, effective immediately. Claire's leadership was reaffirmed. The project would continue. Security escorted Derek from the building while he was still trying to form a sentence. Meanwhile, 3 miles away on the job site, Marcus Jennings was finishing the last connection on the 4th floor of Building C. He tightened the final bolt, stepped back, and nodded to the apprentice beside him. Hit the breaker. The apprentice pulled the switch. The lights came on every floor, every panel, every circuit clean and steady, the way power moves when the path is right. The crew on the ground floor looked up at the glow spreading through the building and began to clap. Ray Callahan walked over, put both hands on Marcus's shoulders, and looked him in the eye. "Your wife would be proud of you, son." Marcus said nothing. He just stood there in the light he had built, and for the first time in a very long time, he believed it. 1 week later, the Portland River crossing held its ribbon-cutting ceremony under a sky that had cleared just enough to let the late October sun through. City officials, investors, and company employees gathered on the plaza in front of Building C, the same building that had nearly brought the whole project down. Clare Whitmore stood at the podium in a navy coat and gave a short speech thanking her team, her crew, and the legacy of her father, whose name was etched into the cornerstone. She did not single anyone out. That was deliberate. After the ceremony, she found Marcus standing beyond the crowd, near the perimeter fence, holding his phone up so Sophie could see the building on FaceTime. "See that, Soph? That's the one Daddy fixed." Sophie's voice came through the speaker, bright and certain. "I told you you're the best at fixing things." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts deep and does not try to be anything other than what it is. Claire approached and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal letter offering him the position of Director of Electrical Systems at Whitmore Industrial Solutions, a full-time role with comprehensive benefits, a pension plan, and a flexible schedule built around one non-negotiable clause. The holder of this position would never be required to work past 6 in the evening. At the bottom of the typed page, beneath the signature line and the company seal, was a single line written in Claire's handwriting. "This isn't charity. This is overdue." Marcus read it, then folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He looked at her. "I'll think about it," he said. Claire smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw her smile the way a person smiles when they are not performing, not calculating, not managing an impression, just smiling. "That's exactly what I'd say," she said. They stood there for a moment, side by side, looking at the building they had both saved in different ways, him with his hands, her with her voice. The crowd behind them was thinning out, coats buttoned against the October chill, cars starting in the lot. Neither of them said what was forming quietly between them. Neither of them needed to. Some things begin not with a declaration but with a silence that two people choose not to fill, a shared understanding that whatever comes next will arrive when it is ready, and not a moment before. That afternoon, Marcus pulled up to Sophie's school and found her waiting on the front steps with her backpack and a rolled-up piece of paper. She climbed into the truck and immediately unrolled it. "Look, Daddy, I made a new drawing." He took it. 3 figures stood in front of a tall building, one tall with a yellow hard hat, one small with red shoes, and one in between with dark hair and what Sophie had carefully labeled the lady with the nice eyes. Above them, a bright yellow sun. Below them, green grass. And at the top, in her best handwriting, "My family and the building." Marcus looked at the drawing for a long time. He did not correct her. He did not explain. He just folded it gently, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and took her hand. They walked together under the Portland maples, their leaves turning gold in the late afternoon light, and Sophie swung his arm back and forth the way children do when they believe the whole world is exactly as it should be.